recording is on. Just double check. Yep. Okay. And here we go. So you should now see my screen. If at any point I start to break up, at least my speech starts to break up, do let me know, and I'll turn off my camera as well. So far, touch wood, today the Shetland broadband has been pretty good, so there hasn't been a problem, but occasionally these things happen. So on your screen, you should see the Norse place name distribution in Scotland, and perhaps myself in a smaller screen somewhere on the on your computer as well. Right, so it gives me great pleasure to be here this evening to introduce you to an area of research which particularly interests me and that I've spent quite a long time looking at, and that is the place name evidence for the Norse impact on Scotland. And you can, there we go, somebody's got the microphone still on. You could, okay, it sounds like a bell as well. So please just check, turn your microphones off. You can see from this map here that Norse place names occur rather widely in Scotland. So I'm going to restrict myself mainly today to the Norse coastal names of Western Scotland, comparing these with Norway, and say something, I hope, about the nature of the Norse presence in Western Scotland. And then I want to move on to Shetland, because, well, who wouldn't want to move on to Shetland? And since I live in Shetland, it's of particular interest to me. For those who are unaware, and I'm sure there aren't that many, but if you are unaware, the Norse period in Western Scotland, and to be honest, in Scotland more generally, dates essentially from 795 AD, when the great monastery of Iona was attacked, to 1266, when the Treaty of Perth was signed between Scotland and Norway, and the Hebrides ceased being part of Norway and became instead part of the Kingdom of Scotland. The Hebrides had been annexed by Norway in 1098, when the Norwegian king Magnus Barefoot and King Edgar of Scotland agreed to divide up the area. The Hebrides, all the islands along the west, and Kintyre became part of the Kingdom of Norway, and the coastal strip north of Kintyre was assigned to Scotland. And it was possibly at this point that the name Scotlandsfjordur, or Scotland's Fjords, was coined. And this name occurs several times in the Icelandic sagas and refers to the mainland coastal area of Western Scotland, the area we know today as Argyll, an area which has a number of fjords or sea lochs. So it's that general area that I want to focus on first of all. Before we look at the names, which is why we're all here, of course, it's important to emphasise that there are close similarities between the west coast of Scotland and the west coast of Norway. Both have indented mountainous coastlines with offshore islands. I know somebody put a comment on Facebook earlier, are there any other kind of islands? But I suppose there are onshore islands as well. There are islands in rivers and islands in lochs. So I'll stick with offshore islands if nobody minds. So this is quite important because it meant that the Norse had readily available names from home, which they used to describe this new territory when they came across to Scotland. They could apply Norwegian place names in the Scottish situation. And they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. So here we go. We've got a picture of Norway and a picture of Scotland. And I'm not going to ask you to turn on your mics to tell me, but you can shout at the screen which you think is Scotland and which you think is Norway. Just to let you know, spoil the suspense, Scotland is on the left and Norway is on the right there. The late, great Bill Nicolaisen, who did so much for Scottish place name studies, described this situation with his usual eloquence. He said, the colonists brought with them in their mental baggage not just a lexicon of words as part of their linguistic experience, but also an onomasticon of names, including a toponymicon of place names, which they applied to the features of the islands on which they now settled. Now, for those who are not aware, a toponymicon of names, which is a great phrase, means that naming wasn't a hard task for the Norse. They had names off the peg, as you might say, that they could use instantly. They had the names for certain types of features, and they just used those when they saw the same geographical features in Western Scotland. And here are some of the generics. Generic is a general type of place name. And so here are some of the expected topographical names that we might expect from the West. Some more people joining. We're doing sort of multitasking here, looking at the list of people and talking at the same time. So we have, as Nicolaisen said, well, you see the examples here. You've got an example like Sandvik down at the bottom there. That's a good example of what he would call a sort of a complete name that was brought across. It means a sandy bay, and it wasn't coined each time the Norse settlers appeared and said, oh, I think we'll settle at this bay, this sandy bay. They didn't have to recreate that name. They had it in mind. So that type of bay was a sandy bay. So the name fitted. No imagination was required. Another one might be, some of these are more imaginative than others. So we have Svinjart, which is Spain's fjord, but something like Sandvik, which is very, very common up the west coast and also occurs in Orkney and Shetland, is just an unimaginative name that applied to a geographical place. It's also interesting that the word fjord existed and was used, but another word that was very common in Norway for a similar sort of feature, anger, wasn't used. So anger occurs in Stavanger, for example, in Norway, but that wasn't used in Scotland because it had become obsolete by the time the Norse came across. So not only do we have names that the Norse had for certain places that were easy to apply, there's also a kind of time limit to these names as well. They have to be names that are in fashion when the Norse are making the trip across. And old-fashioned names like Anger weren't used. Another aspect of this onomasticon, this collection of place names, are habitative names. What I gave you before were topographical names, the names of topographical features. The other type of name are habitative names, and those are names which indicate a farm or a settlement of some kind. Habitative place names have a more restricted distribution in Scotland than the topographical names, and they seem to indicate a denser, more long-lasting Norse-speaking settlement. So when the Norse appeared, they used topographical names to describe the landscape that they saw. They settled. They used these topographical names for their initial settlements, it appears. And then as time went on, as settlement developed and became denser, then they used words with their equivalent of farm or farmsteading or stead to fill in the settlement landscape. And the most common of these habitative names is Bolstadr. It has a wide distribution across Scotland. Its exact meaning is debated, but farm will do for our purposes. And it's been extensively researched by Per Gammeltoft, who you can see here. It also occurs in Iceland and widely in Norway. But it has a greater concentration in the Scottish Islands than it does along the coast, suggesting a denser Norse population in the Scottish Islands than along the west coast. However, they do occur on the west coast too, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples next. There is an interesting distinction between Bolstadr in Scotland and Bolstadr in Norway, in that it seems to, you get a far richer variety of Bolstadr names in Scotland than you do in Norway. The settlers seem to have used it in a more imaginative manner than they did in Norway. So there's a wider range of types. When I say types, I'm talking about the specific bit that's attached to Bolstadr. So it could be Fladavister in Shetland, the flat Bolstadr, etc. Okay, so although they were coming across and using the types of names that they had in Norway, there was also the opportunity for innovation in the new situation they found themselves in Scotland. Now, here you can see an image of the west coast, a particular part of it. You can see Kintyre, which is marked on the map. And you can see a number of Bolstadrs that have been recently identified in Kintyre, indicating some dense Norse settlement in the Kintyre Peninsula. As I mentioned just before, Bolstadr doesn't occur very often on the actual coast of Scotland, but in the case of Kintyre, there are a few examples of it. There's also another farm name, habitative name, Saurbær, there as well. That's somebody's got their microphone on. Please just check you've got it turned off. Bolstadrs and this Saurbær, which means boggy farm. It took a little while to identify these Bolstadrs, but I'm fairly confident that we have them in this area. One of them is now known as Caliburn, which doesn't look particularly Norse, it has to be said, but the name occurred in 1505 in a rental, and it was recorded as Killipol. So it has changed over time, but in origin, it looks to be a Bolstadr. And similarly, Knock Skalbert was Knock Skalpel in a source not that long ago, in 1902. And the full bit there also seems to be a remnant of Bolstadr, which I suppose indicates the nature of place name research. If you are presented with a place name, you often have to go back to the oldest form that you can find to try and identify it, because it may have changed considerably just through word of mouth. Because if you were faced with Caliburn, you would think that you were looking at maybe a Scots place name, but in fact it's a Norse one. The fact that we have a number of Bolstadr names in Kintyre is not surprising when we actually look at Kintyre in the whole, in the round, and we can see that there are quite a number of Norse place names in the peninsula. So that indicates that there was quite heavy settlement. And in fact, it's likely that Kintyre was treated effectively as a Hebridean island by the Norse, because it's really the contact with Knapdale to the north is only a very small part of land. It is effectively an island. Quite like that place name there, Wiggle. Okay. And somebody's got their microphone on. Please double check. Yep. Hello. Check your microphones off, please. Thank you. I think somebody got it on and doing something else in the background. Prior to the appearance of the Norse, Kintyre had been part of the Gaelic-speaking kingdom of Dalriata. And sometimes I think that the Norse impact on Dalriata has been underestimated. However, when you look at all the Norse names occurring in the area, at least the ones that we can identify, it becomes clearer that Norse impact on Old Dalriata was considerable. Now, the mess is intentional, okay? It's just to increase the impact. You can see all the Norse place names of Kintyre, okay? Just another double check. It doesn't bother me having somebody having the microphone on in the background, but it might interfere with what you hear. So please just double check that you've got your microphone off. I'm not sure who it is because the system doesn't allow me to point the finger, which is probably a good idea, a good thing. But as I say, when we're doing our own teaching on the MLIT, we have the ability to see who is actually on and who hasn't switched off their system. So just double check, please. Okay. Or keep very, very quiet. So as you can see, Old Dalriata, this centre of the Gaelic Scotland, underwent some strong Norse impact. And I'm going to show you some of the names that in a little bit more detail from this area. Now, the Norse names haven't replaced earlier names, which is the situation in Shetland and Orkney, because we have evidence for the survival of names that were coined before the Norse arrived. So we have a Gaelic onomasticon surviving, if you like, underneath the Norse names. We also have Gaelic names on top of the Norse names as well. The Norse names are like a filling in a Gaelic sandwich, if you like. But these names, the ones that I've put on the screen for you, these are names that we know predate the arrival of the Norse because they exist in sources, written sources that predate the arrival of the Norse. So Danad there, which was I suppose you could say the capital or one of the capitals of Dalriata, occurs in an Irish annal entry of 736, so a good 60 odd years before the Norse appeared. And it says, Angus, son of Fergus, king of the Picts, laid waste the territory of Dalriata and seized Danad. Okay? So it wasn't just the Norse that attacked and razed Dalriata, it was the Picts a couple of generations before who did it as well. Iona itself, the name occurs in pre-Norse sources, as does the, for example, Danaverty, the name of a Dalriadic fort at the end of Kintyre. So we have quite a lot of these. Well, in comparison to other parts of North Scotland, if you like, we have quite a lot of these pre-Norse Gaelic names, and you can see them mapped there. However, despite the fact we have these names, I want to actually focus on the extent of Norse names in Dalriata, and just to show you how close to the centre of Dalriata these names actually exist. So let's start with this. Loch Lynny. It's actually strange coining that Loch Lynny, the name itself, is not a pre-Norse name, but this fjord, if you like, that goes into the heart of the Highlands, a 50-kilometre long sea loch, has a number of Norse names very far in. We have a dale place name, Glen Stockdale. We have a river name from Au at Inversandau or Inversanda. We have an island name in A with Eriska, so Eric's Island. We have a Ness place name. And we also, well, the most interesting Ness place name, those in Shetland know what a Ness is. It's a sort of peninsula that sticks out, is Invershipnish, which is right in here, almost in the heart of the Highlands. It's at the end of Loch Lynny. And this means, well, Inver is a Gaelic generic. It means the confluence of a river and another river, or a river and the sea. So that's a Gaelic bit. But the Shippenish is Norse and comes from Skipness, so ship, Shipness, ship point. And the fact that it lies at the end of Loch Lynny and the beginning of the Great Glen can't be coincidence. This is where the Caledonian Canal starts, if you're going towards Inverness. And it's possible that this was a place where ships were unloaded and loaded because of trade going up and down the Great Glen. But you couldn't really find a Norse place name any further into the heartland of Scotland than that. If we look at the area around Danad, which I mentioned was one of the capitals of Dalriata, one of the capitals of the Gaelic heartland of Scotland, we also see Norse names. And this is intriguing because one would have thought, since we know that Gaelic survived in this area, that the Norse wouldn't have been able to have made much of an inroad into this area. But in fact, they did. The parish in which Danad stands used to be called Ard Skjodnish. Now, Ard is a Gaelic word as well. It means sort of a height, so an elevated piece of land. And Skjodnish seems to be from Scatness, so the sticky out headland. We've got Scatness here in Shetland. So this is the high point of the sticky out headland. And because of the way that the name is constructed, the Norse bit is older than the Gaelic bit. Okay, the Scatness exists perfectly well as a name, but when the meaning was lost, a Gaelic generic Ard was stuck in front of it. So I guess the point is Danad, capital of Dalriata, at the heart of the Gaelic Scotland, the parish in which it stands has a Norse name. So this might indicate a loss of status for Danad during the Norse period, or the fact that maybe the Norse just disregarded it as a place. It also suggests that the Norse didn't take the old name into account. They were happy to call the territory something else. Danad can be seen as a central place as far as the Gaelic world is concerned. It was the seat of a king. It was an important trading place. It was a place where they made jewelry. It's a place where they imported wine. So it was a place where people would have paid their taxes. So it was an important place in the Gaelic world. But the fact that it seems to be disregarded by the Norse is surely important. And it seems as if the Norse set up their own central places in the area, disregarding Danad. And the island of Colonsay would make a good candidate for being one of these Norse central places. Colonsay has a Norse name. It's Kolbeins Island. It also has a concentration of important Norse burials, and it has the most impressive Norse burial. That's somebody else coming in. So far discovered in Scotland at Killoran Bay, which is a boat burial. But there were two other horse burials. That's not just burials of horses. That's people buried with horses, and quite a variety of different things have been found in Colonsay. And considering it's not so far away from Danad, might lead you to think that this is a kind of a competitor being set up against the Gaelic central place. If we look at Colonsay itself, we can see that there are a good number of Norse place names on the island, including the sort of usual generics that we would expect. So names in Ness, so Ru Arsht Alanish. Alanish is the Norse name. Ru Arsht is the Gaelic name stuck on the front. And there's an Ard Skianish as well. We have the Dale place names. So Croch Ormathil, which is the rock, it's a Gaelic word, or sorry, the little hill, Croch of Ormathil, of Orm's Dale. There's a Vik place name, a Bay place name at Uragik, etc., etc. So there are a lot of Norse place names on Colonsay, not just the name of the island itself. So it's telling us that there was a quite dense Norse settlement on Colonsay, which we can also consider in Kintyre as well. If we return to Danad from a slightly different perspective and look at the sea approaches to Danad, we can see that we have a lot of Norse names here as well. Names of the islands, some Dale names, some Vik names, some, a habitative name, Sorba, right in the middle in red, which is Sauerbayer again, the sort of boggy, marshy farm. And there's one Bullstather name, Cullipool, there on the west coast. So there was a lot of Norse activity, a lot of Norse naming, and by extension, Norse settlement in the area approaching Danad. As I say, a number of island names, including, how are we doing for time? Right. Skaraba. Skaraba is interesting because this is an example of a name that we find also in Norway. This is a good example of Nicolaison's toponymicon, if you like, these ready-formed names that the Norse brought with them and had at hand when they saw a geographical feature that they recognized. So they sailed past this and they said, that's a Skaraba. Okay, and the name occurs as Skorpu in the medieval Icelandic Friesbok, and it has an exact match in the Norwegian island named Skorpa, which is described by Sandnes and Stemshaug as a mountainous and an island with high rounded hills. And we can see an example here. There it is. There's a Norwegian example of the same type of land formation, if you like. So that's the Norwegian Skorpu, and there's Skarpa. Okay. But it's not alone. There are others, sort of direct parallels that we can draw. And I think more interesting, I think, than Scarpa is the name Torsa. Now, there are Norwegian parallels to this. This is the Scottish Torsa, which is beside Loch Melfort on the west coast, just a little bit up from Kintyre. And it's situated just to the north of Loch Melfort at the entry to the Cuan Sound, which is a risky bit of sea that takes you towards out towards Islay and Jura. And what's particularly interesting about Torsa is that this could be one of the sort of holy grail of place names, as far as Norse place names have holy grails, and that is it could be a theophoric name. That is a god name. Lots of place name scholars will probably throw up their hands in horror about this because it's become kind of accepted norm that there are hardly any theophoric names at all of Norse origin in the British Isles. But I think we have a good example here. Now, Peder Gammeltoft suggested that it comes from Thorisey, so which is Thorir's island. And there is indeed an Icelandic island called Thorisey, so that makes absolute sense. So it could be from the man's name, Thorir. However, Torsa doesn't have this little internal vowel, the equivalent of the I there. So it doesn't have that before the genitive S. And we do have an example of, I think, a Thorir say, in Tiree. We have a place called Boa Horisai, which looks very much like Thorir's island, and that does have this vowel. So it's been borrowed, and it's obvious and exists and is preserved in the Tiree place name. So why wouldn't it be preserved in the name here off the west coast of Scotland? I think it's more likely that the vowel didn't exist. It wasn't there. And what we're looking at is Thor or Thor. So it's Thor's island. Now, if it was just the lack of a vowel in the middle of a place name, well, you'd be justified in saying, he's just he's havering, okay? But in fact, we have other islands in Scandinavia that come from Thor's island. It's not an unknown phenomenon. There's Thorsøy in Vestfold in Norway, which according to Stefan Brink comes from Thor. And we have a Thorsø in Västergötland in Sweden as well, which again, according to Stefan Brink, comes from the god name. So why not here on the west, in the west of Scotland? Because it's not just the fact that it looks like Thor's Island, and we have Thor's Islands in Scandinavia. It's also its position on the west coast is similar to the position of Thor's Islands in Norway. So there are several examples of these called Thorsøya in Norway, and I've discussed this with a Norwegian colleague, Arne Kruse, who knows a great deal about the west coast of Norway. And the location of Thorsøya is in a very similar sort of position, geographical position, to the Torsa in Scotland. It's located at the entrance of a narrow path, a sort of sea route inside one of the between a number of different islands. There's another one in Kristiansand, which is an island with a lighthouse. So again, it's central for navigation. And Thorsøya by Flekkefjord on the west coast of Norway, it's the same again. There seem to be islands that are important for navigation, and they also seem to be islands with bits of dangerous sea around them. And as I said, the Torsa on the west coast of Scotland is beside the Cuan Sound, which is this kind of rather dangerous stretch of water. So you've got a similar position, got the same sort of name. It seems petty not to say. We've got an example of a Thor's Island in Scotland. And we could even come up with a reason for it. Perhaps a quick offering to Thor was made before entering this particular dangerous piece of water, or perhaps more likely after you've exited it, you make a gift. Thank you very much, Thor, for allowing me to pass through this particular dangerous sea. Okay. Now, again, I don't think that Torsa stands alone. There's another possible sacral or sacred name in this area, just off the coast of Kintyre, and it's the island of Gia. Now, Gia, as it stands today, well, it doesn't look like anything. It's not immediately interpretable. But in Hákonar's saga Gamla, the saga of Håkon, King Håkon, the name is recorded 4 times as Gudey, so God Island. And the modern form can be seen as a development of this. In a 14th century source, it's recorded as Guthi, while in a charter of 1309, the form is Gugh. The G bit on the end is a fricative sound, and that is preserved in the local pronunciation, which was recorded by the scholars of the Scottish Gaelic dialect in the 50s and 60s, I think it was. And they recorded the local pronunciation of Gia as Kiga or Kuga, with the sound in it. Now, this is often in Gaelic a replacement for an earlier maybe you probably can't hear that on this th sound, okay, which was lost in Gaelic in the later part of the Middle Ages. So you can make a direct link between Gia as it exists today and Gudey as it was recorded in the saga. And we also have examples in Norway of the same name. There are several islands called Gudøya. There's a Gudøya near Ålesund in Møre and Romsdal, which is written Gudøy in 1351. And again, going back to the Norwegian place name experts, Sandnes and Stemshaug, they propose that the Gud in Gudøya, this God bit, doesn't refer to the Christian God, but rather to an unnamed heathen god. And they suggest that the name is truly tells you that about a site of heathen god worship. So you've got these names for islands in Norway, and you've got this name that looks to be the same in Scotland, and Norwegian scholars are quite happy to regard it as a sacred pagan name. So why not in the Scottish context as well? And if we can add Horsa to that, we've got a little, is it a cluster? We've got 2 names, similar names, in the kind of similar area of Scotland. Again, the reason for maybe naming your island after gods could be for navigational purposes. And recently, Arne Kruse, again, in the publication of the 18th Viking Congress, talks about Gudøya off the coast of Norway, which is very close to Saltstraumen, which is the world's most powerful maelstrom. And it's there again as a place that presumably people made some kind of offering when going near to this dangerous piece of sea. And he's quite happy to see Gia in Scotland as a Scottish parallel for Budøya in Norway. Because if you come not so far from Gia, head west and north a little bit, you come to the Corrie Vrechen, which is the second most powerful maelstrom, or maybe it's the third. Well, we'll go for the second most powerful maelstrom or whirlpool in the world. So you've got two very similar dangerous pieces of sea that have to be approached with trepidation. So in this area then of Scotland, in the southwest, we've got a lot of Norse names, many more than people have really paid much attention to in the past. We've got evidence for habitative names as well, indicating quite dense settlement in a number of different parts of the West. We've got a lot of Norse names associated with coastal features and sailing directions. We seem to have some theophoric names, specific ones that are associated with gods that you might want to ask for help when you're sailing. And we have, despite the fact we have the survival of pre-Norse names in the area, it's as if the Norse totally sort of disregarded the Gaelic names, or at the very least they disregarded a place like Dunad, which you think they might have sort of paid some sort of notice to. There's the Norwegian evidence for suggesting that Gia is one of these god names. So there's a Budøya there, just off the coast at Ålesund. So there it is, just in case you're wondering. That's the Norwegian equivalent of Gia. Now, there's a very strange thing about Gia that is probably not related, but it has to be mentioned. On Gia, there are these strange standing stones. There's the Botach, which it means the old man, and the Cailleach, which means the old woman. And it was recorded as late as the early part of the 19th century that Irish fishermen used to climb the Croch in Chesave, the hill of prosperity, where these stones stand, and pay them homage in the hope of good fishing. Okay, so the Botach and the Cailleach are evidence for fishermen and for sailors doing some kind of ritual act on Gia. Are these or one of them, is that the Gvud that the Norse were paying attention to in their place name? That's probably too good to be true, as I say, and we can't prove it. But it's rather interesting that the same island has this connection with sailors and fishermen doing some kind of ritual act. Now, we don't have very much longer, and I did say that I would mention Shetland. So I just want to give a few examples of the types of names that we have in Shetland as well. We have a huge range of topographical names. That's names naming topographical features. And we have a lot of habitative names, i.e. farm names in Shetland as well. Basically, the Shetland is a Norse set of islands as far as the place names go. They have undergone some transformation with the language shift from Norn into Scots, but they're generally very easy to interpret, or at least the generic part is. Sometimes the specific, that goes along with it can be a little bit more difficult to identify. But unlike the area that I showed you before, there is really no evidence for pre-Norse names in Shetland. So the the density and impact of the Norse in Shetland was of a different order from what I was discussing earlier. So we have island names. The Old Norse word for island, a, appears as an a or an a in Shetland, and most of the islands have examples of that. So there's Burra, Borgarøy, the Fort Island, or the Broch Island, Balsa, the Whale Island, Fula, Bird Island, and Machorø, so Roydøy. Don't know why I've got the that's. I've taken this from a different talk that I do. It should just be EY. So forget these strange slashed O's there. But anyway, so we have Red Islands and Bird Islands and Fort Islands and Whale Islands. We have any number of coastal feature named by the Norse. Oops, right there. So we have Vo from Vaugur, meaning a bay. We have the Hope, so it comes out in many different forms, but Hubi, so a different type of bay. We have all the different stacks. Stack itself is a Norse word, but we have stacks with specific names, like the Drongs from Drangur, a pointed rock. And we have a large number of Vik place names as well. Now, Vik place names are very widely distributed, not just in Shetland, but all the way down the coast of Scotland. And on the west coast of Scotland, it doesn't usually come out as clearly as Wick. It's usually just Ik. So a name like Mal-Ik or Arasik, the Ik bit on the end is the remains of Old Norse Vik. And we also have the simple version of it as an Uig in Skye. Just means Vik. This means the bay. Okay. Another example of a coastal name. Okay. Rather than just give you a range of different generics, I think we will draw it to an end there. I have featured the West a lot more than Shetland, so I apologise to the Shetlanders, but I hope what it's done is it's opened your eyes to the extent of Norse naming, not just in our Northern Isles, where we sort of know that and we're proud of it and we experience it every day, but also that this Norse naming is much more widespread. And there is something that links the Northern Isles to the west of Scotland, to the Hebrides, and even to places like Kintyre. There we are. So, as I say, we'll draw it to an end there. This was just a taster. Obviously, if I was doing it for real, I would have gone for 2 hours. There's Rory, his microphone's off, so please just turn it off. Hopefully, everyone has learnt something. As I say, it's not a specialist talk as such, but if you're interested in Viking Scotland, if you're interested in Orkney or Shetland, then do have a look at what we have on offer at the Institute of Northern Studies, and I look forward to seeing you in the future and answering your questions. We can't really answer the questions tonight because we need somebody else in charge of that, but I hope most of them have been answered and that you're aware of the extent of Scotland's Norse place name heritage. So, thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I think I got the time wrong. Has it been recorded?
It has indeed. So I'm going to be putting that up. So the link will be ready quite soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in Norway, so I got my times wrong.
That's easily done. So, okay, so I just turn the stop recording.